Yeah, welcome, my friends. I get off a little bit on a tangent before I run off into what I'm planning on blabbering about in this vlog. I've signed up or joined a number of forums or communities, the RPG Brigade being a good example of them, and they all have their rules and their little niches and things. I keep running into some of them where they get cheesed when you let people know you've made a vlog. Somehow or another, it's considered spam or junk mail, and I have issues with some of that. And first off, is I get it if you're promoting merchandise or some sort of, I don't know, I guess. But if you're blogging about stuff that's related to what the channel supports, isn't that the kind of the whole point of the channel in the first place, is sharing your thoughts and ideas and your experiences with your fellow enthusiasts, regardless of what the channel is? I mean, if you're, you know, I'm just saying, maybe it's just me. Okay, maybe I don't understand the mindset of what's going on today in this stuff. This stuff is still fairly new to me, which I know sounds really difficult to buy into, but things have changed radically over the years, and I'm a late bloomer when it comes to a lot of stuff. I tend to have a holdout. I was playing text-based game systems for decades after everybody was playing high graphic stuff because I like that style of stuff. Okay, as an example. But those things kind of finally petered out, and what do? They're still around, but it's not quite the same thing as they were back in the day. So, anyway, back onto what my original concept is. Character development in creating character or personas for writing. If you're writing a novel, and this applies to creating characters in for a game system too, for a role-playing game. Hence the term role-playing. We're going to take on the role of something that we're not. We're trying to step foot out of our own existence and put on somebody else's shoes and make them tap dance. Okay. In the case of writing a character, developing a character, there are huge amounts of variations on how to achieve this. And a lot of people, a lot of would-be writers go out of the way to spend a lot of time on developing backstory and character development and the what, for, and the why fors and so on and so forth. I mean, just think of name creation. A lot of times people will agonize or struggle over coming up with a name for a particular character, and others will create endless lists of potential names that they could utilize. And other times, names just leap out at you. It makes something like, I want to do this. And then there's the one that frustrates a lot of my players and friends over the years is my tendency to just make up a name on the fly, you know. So I mean, I'm looking at my camcorder thing here on the laptop going, and in the upper left corner it says record REC and some numbers, right? So if I go and I say Rico, RECOO, there's your name, right? I just found something. Oh, here goes. This is frames and scenes. So we'll say frames, FRAES, right? Bit of this, bit of that. Here's a name. And they're like, that's a name? Well, I guess it's a name. Well, when you're dealing with fantasy, when you're dealing with fantasy or science fiction, it's up to you. You know, a lot of strange names are out there, and you can look at the modern media or just look at the world around you and hear a lot of people actually, nowadays where the traditional names that were acceptable in our countries are kind of being replaced by some stuff that people are thinking, I wouldn't name my kid that. What's wrong with you? Right? Okay. What is what? Uh, like I said, I'm currently working on trying to get my second novel in a series from written rough draft to a printed or a typed second draft, which from there I'm doing a third rewrite draft. And every time I put pen to paper and then bring paper to digital format, I'm doing a rewrite. And that's it, you can't help yourself but tweak things, change things. It's just a never-ending deal. But when it comes to character development, uh, I made a mistake on one of my earliest novel attempts of trying to overthink everything. I tried to create a very in-depth character pool. I wanted these characters and the secondary line characters, these NPCs, these non-player characters, to have a rich background, a rich story life, and it was where I found spending most of my time working on these, developing something instead of telling their story, talking about them, writing about how they're, letting them tell me how they're going to act to the given scenarios I'm putting in front of them, even though it's my fingers on the keyboard or my pen that's putting thoughts to paper. Okay, I mean it's a bit tough. I'm gonna bring up the one I'm currently working on, Luckless. Luckless. Uh, my friend and I were collaborating on working on together on writing this book, and we decided we needed. Well, I decided we needed to look at uh, a different character from some of the ones that we used in the first novel. They're still in there, but they're not prominent as they are as others in the Flaytaber family are. And Luckless was and is a very unusual character, and just his unusual birth and obvious issues makes him uh, have a lot of backstory that we'll never see, and I never bothered to create. But we discussed it. My friend Shannon and I discussed it, and from there, this character developed. Luculos, his mother is a Kataran who's an alien species based on feline genes. So it's basically a walking, talking feline, a cat woman. Okay, and the father is a much more complicated genome. In the future of settled space, in my version of the game system I created that's pending, the humanity has taken the genes development and gene splicing to an extreme level over the millennia, and in the process, they've created a lot of for all intents and purposes, new life forms. Uh, the argument is that mostly when Earth got the ability to leave its solar system and went out and started exploring, it discovered that humans were the top of the pecking order when it comes to technology. That yes, there were all, other aliens out there, but none of them had developed to our degree. They either wiped themselves out or just hadn't developed the high tech levels that humanity has and still does. So to fit into certain environments and stuff, humanity decided to create genomes, which is taking human genes and modifying them. A lot of times, incorporating either alien strands of DNA or other animals, plants and animals, to give humans properties that let them exist in certain environments or to achieve certain goals. Well, in the case of Luckless's father, Mel, he is a primary character, and throughout these novels, he is the House Lord, the Duke of House Hathion, and he is an aviary. The aviaries were created several thousand years before by a group of scientists who genetically engineered human avian genes into this very prodigious and successful program. Now, his particular strand is peregrine, so he is peregrine human, and he has a lot of the traits of human and a lot of the peregrine traits. So he's a walking bird man, literally, and he can fly, sure. So, uh, combining that gene, his DNA strands, with the Kataran female that he marries to create Luculos brought in my mind, a whole lot of problems because genetically speaking, they're not compatible. And in addition to it, they're very complicated and complex. So we're already taking a complex pre-generated or pre-created gene pool and mingling it with a very alien gene pool, which caused a combination. So we get a walking, talking, Kataran looking aviary. Now, what I mean by that is that the Kataran gene pool dominates. So Luckless looks like a walking, talking cat, except he's sickly. He looks sick. He looks a little bit deformed. He has some posture issues because of his thinner, weaker bone structure. His immune system had a lot of problems. So we speculated that he spent a good chunk of his childhood bedridden or in and out of hospitals and under the care of specialists who to keep him from, to make him so he could live a somewhat normal life, had to do an awful lot of work on him. And after the fact, you can't really go in and tweak the genes after you've hatched the egg, so to speak. So you have to do other stuff. In his case, they leaned towards bioorgan replacement and cyber technology. So we have a lot of cyberware in Luckless at an early age. Now, in my game world, the use of cyber technology or wetware is quite common. The most common being an implant, a neural implant about the size of a pinhead that allows you to connect, basically putting your cell phone in your head and your laptop in your head so you can connect and do all the things you would normally do with those devices inside your brain. And I think that will be a very common thing in the near future. But the less common, more expensive wetware programs start getting into the $6 million man kind of thing, where we can enhance speed, reflexes, and strength, and can add weapons and capabilities to an individual by tweaking them and implanting stuff. So in his case, they use this to enhance his ability to walk and talk and to function as normal as possible. So while he has advanced wetware, it was installed. A lot of it was installed when he was still in his adolescent stage, which in my game world is probably considered a no-no because you're dealing with a person who isn't fully developed, and by messing with that sort of stuff, putting things in them, it might have unforeseen issues. Well, in this case, for health reasons, they had to risk it. So Luckless actually has quite a bit of technology in him, bioware and organic components that in a full-grown adult would give them a lot more capability than they do than Luckless gets because his was put in at too early of a development stage. This doesn't translate to mean that he doesn't have some superpower-like abilities. He does, but they're not nearly as powerful as it would be in another agent, so to speak. And then we take his character development further. And we figured that because he spends so much time alone in his room or in the hospital rooms, even with his family around, you're still isolated. Uh, I listened to stories from my mother when she was a kid. She had romantic fever and was bedridden for a year. So you really does affect you. In his case, he becomes very inverted, introverted, um, because he has issues trying to deal with other people on a social level, and he has uh, more inward focused things than outward. So this leads to a bit more of a darker personality type. We have some quirks and stuff for him that I won't get into, but the becomes spends so much time with computers that he becomes a very, very talented computer coder, programmer. But the opposite as well, because he can slice other people's codes fairly fast, fairly quick. So he spent a lot of time getting into things electronically he shouldn't have. There's like that feline curiosity thing that gets in the way. He then started to do some things that was becoming, it was alarming those around him. And the question about what kind of alignment, if you will, what kind of disposition he was going to have as an adult, and his parents were worried. The house spy mistress decided to step in at this point after he had been caught doing slicing into some encrypted, possibly off hands off stuff, and takes him under her wing, so to speak. starts to give him guidance, give this dark bent mindset an outlet that's more healthier than for development than to let it continue down the path that it was going. This leads him to the position of where he's at in the Halcyon intelligence branch, and this gives us a well-rounded, very deep character development for this particular character. We know he has a lot of issues. We know that he has a lot of capabilities. We understand why he would react in certain situations differently than his siblings would, because most of his siblings are outgoing and energetic. They are born leaders and are being groomed to be leaders to rule the house and support the ruler of the house at some point down the road. Where Luckless, on the other hand, was kind of the oddball, the odd man out, and that could have become problematic at some point. He could, become a bad guy, and we don't want to see that. We want to see him develop. So we developed this. We let him develop, and we listened to his voice. We listened to what Luckless had to say as a character through the stories as the stories developed. We watched how he grew on paper, and in doing so, we crafted the character, but then we left enough open, unscripted space around him that he could develop as a character as we go. And in the case of a lot of the characters, pretty much the only characters in my novels that don't grow this way are the 2D ones. The very basic, homogenized, conceptual type of stand-in or backstop. So when you go to the store, the clerk at the store, we don't care about their backstory. We don't care about their genetic history. We don't care about who they know, what their hopes and dreams are. They're just a fixed piece to move the story from this piece to the next section to the next section. They're here, they're gone, they're by. We don't need them. So don't go into any effort to create anything more than a word or two, if even that, because now, a note on that, while I say that, I also know that I don't like the idea of not perpetrating or reusing stuff. So in the case of some of these little 2-bit characters, they can take on lives of their own at some point without really meaning to. And Ping Storm comes to mind. Ping Storm was an NPC character who was only supposed to be in a chapter just to cause a little bit of problems for Luckless, and because he's a nosy reporter. But there was an instant rapport between Ping and Luckless and his so-called partner Corbett, and before we knew it, Ping was off on a rampage and dragging us along in the story with it. And I just couldn't help but not keep feeding the beast. I wanted to see where this was going to go, and it surprised me. And I'm the creator of the book. It surprised my friend Shannon, who basically wrote responses to things I threw at him. So, this is what's going on. What would you do, right? How would Luckless act, or how would Mel? What would Mel say? And then we tied them together. So, like I said, when you're developing your characters, give a lot of thought, but don't give too much thought to them. Give a lot of structure, but don't fill the structure in. Make some leave some room for them to grow, because they're going to do that. And if you're one of those writers who everything absolutely positively has to be finalized or finished before you even sit down to do something, okay, fine, it works for you. It's like the fellows, the folks that want to make an outline. They want to outline their entire book and what's going to happen before they ever start to write the book. Great, you can work that way. I've tried it. It didn't work for me. It didn't work for me. No matter how much I tried to iron out or to perfect a timeline, the actions in the books always have a tendency to grow outside the bounds of the outline. It's like coloring outside the lines, right? I have a tendency to color outside the lines because not only are we looking at the prepackaged concept of what the character should be, but we're not allowing for it to be embellished or to have color of its own. Which this is where we get more, the difference between a color book and a work of art. I'm just saying, right? Okay. Oh, I'm not tooting my own horn on that. I'm just pointing it out. So in the case of Luckless, we didn't start out with a whole lot of backstory on him, although we had spent an afternoon discussing what we thought this particular character would be like, and as the ideas come out, we played on those and said, well, if he did this, then obviously maybe he has a little bit of issue with this. How would he act towards members of outside his family? How does he act towards members of the opposite sex? How would he react to disappointment or shock? What would be his reaction to certain things? And of course, in the process of creating this, we looked at where he came from. So Amel, being a well-developed character from the first book, as well as from the game system we'd played for years, we knew exactly how Amel would act in a given situation. So if all of his progeny have certain quirks, that would be stuff that your kid would get from you. If you're the parent, your kid develops certain things from watching and watching you react to certain things. So in this case, Luckless Amel has a bit of a, I don't want to call it an evil streak, but there's a dark streak in Amel, but he keeps a tight lid on it, very, very tight lid. But occasionally, once in a little while, something motivates him to let some of it loose. Well, Luckless gets a bit more of the pool of that side, the dark pool of that side of things. Amusu, the oldest son, he has a bit of it too, and it shows up in some odd ways. And his character development becomes more darker over time. He doesn't initially start out that way. Now, Luckless started out with a bit of a darkness in it. For our first scene in chapter 1 of Luckless, our introduction to this character, is he's breaking into a super secret vault under the intelligence ministry's headquarters, and where the ministry keeps a lot of its blacklisted hush hush illegal stuff that it's not good to let the public know you have, or the over government, in this case the Imperium. Iowa has, my home state of Iowa has its own CIA, and we keep a warehouse full of stuff we don't want the federal government to know about. Last thing we're going to do is let everybody know where it's at. So, but a few people still need to know. Well, Luckless is in a family who's owns and controls everything, so he had at some point found out about it. And in the story, we know that he's been here several times, so this isn't his first rodeo. He slices and fairly easily breaks into one of the most super secure sites in the house. And and his whole purpose for doing so is to steal a Cortex, a computer brain from an antique slicer bot that predates the house. It's from a piece of human history, because our game world and the novels are set 8,000 years in the future. At some point, humanity had its AI war, its Terminator scenario went down, and they overcame it. Well, there were remnants of these super intelligent, self-aware computers still floating around, and most of them are destroyed or dismantled whenever somebody encounters one, as per the Imperium law. Imperium law says we destroy these things whenever we find them because they're bad. They will lead to worse things. And typical of anybody who's in power or has the need to be on par with their neighbors, you find things like this, you hide them. You take advantage of them when you can. You just try to figure out how to glean usable technology or ability from it. Of course, being a technology that's 3,000 years old, ironically, most of it is antique and highly surpassed by the more modern stuff. And yet, because of the sheer timeline we're talking about in human history, there is technology that was developed and lost. So there's still stuff to be found in these ancient artifacts that humanity can't duplicate or hasn't the means to, or it currently doesn't know how to duplicate. So it's lost tech. Um, and I got that concept from some stuff I read about Rome. And the one that first comes, the one that comes to mind right off the bat is Roman concrete. It's it's known that the Romans had a form of concrete, and it's used in a lot of their massive projects. A lot of buildings that people think are built out of blocks of stone, in reality, are not totally blocks of stone. They're actually poured concrete set with stone, and the concrete has some properties. One of them being is that it easily set up underwater. They could pour it underwater, and it was set up and dry. However unlikely that sounds, it was solidify anyway, and yet the recipe for it has been lost down the history. We lost a lot of stuff when everything after the series of plagues and the era of time we call the black, the dark ages, if you will, before the Middle Ages. A lot of things were lost or misplaced, and in this case, the recipe for Roman concrete, which is much more superior than the concrete we use today. And one aspect is its durability. It's still here several thousand years later, and hard as it was when they poured it. So you can't say that with the stuff we got today, because 1,000 years from now, most of the concrete we have is going to be back to its components, gravel and dust. I'm just saying, they already crumble after 10 years. Uh, not durable stuff at all. So in this case, Luckless breaks in, is stealing the cortex from a slicer bot. He hasn't really any idea what he wants to do with it, other than it's a toy. He wants to mess with it. He wants to cut it open, dismantle it, figure out what makes it tick, and go from there. Right? He hasn't a clue what it's capable of. He really doesn't. He knows what the books say. He knows what the history says. He studied all that stuff, but he's never had to deal with one of these things on a one-on-one basis. So now he's got a very evil piece of technology, right? A dark character with an even darker piece of technology, and he's messing with it. But he's not. I'm not gonna keep going on that, because that's part of the story, and it turns into a weird. There's a weird play between these two. So this computer device becomes a character in the books, and a more than a tool. We can call it a friend. But typical of that character, Luckless has found himself an inorganic friend, if you will, and have conversations with it, occasionally confusing the hell out of everybody else around him. They think that he's talking to himself. The example right there of what I'm talking about. We didn't know for sure. I had no idea. I want to introduce this character. What was we going to do? But we needed to set the bar for Luckless, and to just introduce him as him at home at the palace or interacting with another relative. Well, that's not Luckless. Breaking into the computer, the dark vault or the secret vault of the intelligence ministry to steal an extremely illegal device so he could play with it. That's Luckless. That's what I'm talking about right there. Give some thought to your character development, but don't overthink it. Give them a chance to develop and grow. See where they take you.